And we are live. Hi, everyone. It's 2:30 p.m. It's a Wednesday afternoon, and you're watching Innovation Fika with me, Donny, here live from Stockholm, Sweden. KTH, the biggest tech university in Sweden, and of course, well, the best. We could take the best as well, but I have to say that. Every Wednesday, 2:30 p.m., I go live with my Innovation Fika. Fika, as you all know by now, means coffee break in Swedish. So this is a 30-minute coffee break chat with incredible guests with incredible ideas to help you learn incredible things. Always some key learnings as well. I hope we have lots of people online as usual. Post in the comments who you are, where you're from, and then keep the questions going, and we'll pick them up as we go through the broadcast. All of the videos broadcasted here are on my YouTube channel, Innovation Fika YouTube channel, and all of my written content I write almost daily and post on LinkedIn ends up on my Medium page. So I go to Medium and then Donny S. Ligonis. You'll find 505 posts today, actually, with today's post. Today I'm writing about growth mindset, which also kind of brings me to today's subject as well, which is all about economics. Here we go. Look, here we have a frequent viewer. Hi there. Good to see you again. It's always on the show. It's really good. Happy to see you. Anyway, now, enough about me, enough about that. Let's go to our guest. Erik, welcome to the studio. I'm so happy to have you here.
Good to be here, Donny. It's a pleasure.
Honored to have you here. It's just published a new book as well. But
That's
before
right.
we jump into the book and the subject, let's ask you the same question that we ask everybody else. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm a philosopher and an economist. I work at Stockholm University, just a brief stroll from here. And being a philosopher of science, means that I can muck about where I'm neither appreciated nor invited. And so I do interdisciplinary research, trying to keep a finger in every pot. Lots of economics, lots of philosophy, some political philosophy, political science, and so on.
I like the term philosopher and, what did you say, philosopher and economics?
That's right, yeah.
You wouldn't think that they sort of kind of go together, but they do.
That's right. So in our culture, we think of these two endeavors as like radically distinct. One is like a hard social science and the other is the humanities. But in reality, like these two disciplines are actually quite close together. So historically, they all came out of moral philosophy, right? And the split was quite recent. In terms of subject matter, economists and philosophers are often working on the same things, like rationality, welfare, questions of social order, and so on. And then it turns out that we use many of the same ideas and tools. We use formal modeling, abstract argument, game theory, decision theory, and so on. Like in so many different ways, we do the same thing.
And now it starts making sense, because actually, like 20 shows back or something, I had a guest that was talking about rational decisions and how humans don't make rational decisions. And I can understand the connection between the philosopher and the economist there, because it always, the philosopher will start talking about why we don't or do make rational decisions, which will then spill over into economy.
That's exactly right. So my previous book was a textbook in behavioral economics, which is the economics of decision making, the way we really make decisions. And what you find, obviously enough, right, not surprise to anyone, is that people don't always make optimal, perfect decisions. And that raises two kinds of question, right? One is that what ought people to do, which is a normative philosophical question. And then what do they really do? And under what circumstances do these things come apart? And what can we do to provide conditions such that people will approach the ideal? And so this is a perfect example of a domain where the philosophical and the scientific are like perfectly intertwined. In a way, you can't do the one without the other, or that's my view.
Fascinating. And I know that you've just, was it like yesterday you had a launch party, I think?
That's right. Yeah. Last night here in Stockholm, we had a book launch event.
A whole new book. And the book is actually called How Economics Can Save the World, right?
That's right. It's very modest.
It is very modest. And I have an image of it here. There's the cover. How Economics Can Save the World. A very modest, humble book by Erik Angner.
You don't want to read too much into the title. So the idea is that economics can help us build a better world and live better lives in much the same way that modern medicine can cure disease. Right? It's true that it does that. It doesn't do it on its own or magically or in the manner of a magic wand, but it in the right hands, applied in the right way, sort of judiciously and with attention, we can use these tools to improve things. And the same thing is true for economics. Now, the background realize that we live in this era of like widespread science denial and fact resistance and so on. And so there's a movement that sort of undercuts the ability of a social and behavioral science to do something for us. And what the book is trying to accomplish is to say, no, hold on for a second, right? We should be skeptical of economists that appear in the media and so on. But there are ideas here that are actionable, practical, that you can use in your life starting today, and that we can use in our political endeavors.
Yeah, and I actually, I had a pre-release copy of the book, and I read through it as well. And I do like the titles of the chapters, because it's how to eradicate poverty, how to save the climate, how to lots of sort of how to's. And it actually is a very, in my perspective, then as a layman, because I'm not I'm a consumer with money kind of thing. It's a very sort of hands-on kind of way. This is how it actually works and could work or should work as well. So
so the goal was to bridge the gap between sort of abstract academic work and practical advice that we can apply in our own lives. And academics in general tend to be sort of poor at explaining what we can do with this information. Like, how does it change anything? Oftentimes we say something hand-wavy by the end, but we don't spell it out for people. And then sometimes we're upset that like the general population out there isn't taking to heart what we have to say.
They don't get it.
But if you publish 25 pages in the Journal of Philosophy, they're not going to get it, right?
Yeah.
So somebody has to make the effort to sort of explain, not telling people what to do necessarily, but just explain, like, here are some ideas, here's some tools. Like, depending on what you want to accomplish, there's some tools that might be useful for you in business, in work, in nonprofit.
But if we dive into it, let's dive into a couple of chapters, and let's take some of them. I mean, you talk about I think the poverty one is like the first chapter or something like that, and then there's one lining says that give them money.
So if you listen to like public discourse about poverty and anti-poverty programs and so on, you get lots of politicians saying, oh, well, we want to do good for the poor. But how should we do it? Well, we can't give them money because they can't just give them money, right? No, we have to give them food, but not any old food, right? So in the US, you get coupons that you can
SNAP
use for food,
coupons,
but you can't use it for like hot foods. You can only use it for cold foods, because somebody is sitting around thinking, well, it's not good for them to buy hot. They ought to be getting like these kinds of foods or whatever. But then economists have studied, like, what do people do if you give them money in Western countries, in the developing world, and so on? And overwhelmingly, the conclusion is that people use the money wisely. If you try to distribute wheat or something, right, you can do that, but it's hard to distribute wheat. It goes bad.
Money distributes easier than wheat.
Money is a lot easier to distribute. And it turns out that people do not, in general, spend it on tobacco and alcohol and gambling and let their kids starve.
Which, of course, that side of the opinion will say that because I spent a year in the US. We'll take it as an example now. Other countries, of course, but there's the not so liberal movement. They are very strong, opinionated about everybody should that you have to work for it. You can't just give people money, and if they don't have it, they don't deserve it.
Right.
It's kind of very hard sort of.
And you have to make life harder for the poor, right? That's the upshot of many of these interventions. But what the science seems to say, and what the scientists believe, is that just giving people money is the best thing you can do. And moreover, like, you might think of like anti-poverty programs as sort of a left-wing project, but somebody who was in favor of giving poor people money, it was Friedrich von Hayek, who's an icon in the libertarian and conservative movement to this day, and who was a friend and admirer of Thatcher and Reagan and so on. So this is an idea that transcends left and right, and that people ought to be able to rally behind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I without having the research depth and with a very sort of layman-y approach to it, I've been thinking to myself, and this is my personal opinion then, is that, well, Sweden and Finland and Denmark and Norway have kind of been doing that giving people money and supporting them for the last 50, 60, 70 years. And we're obviously doing something right, because we are ranked quite high on both innovation indexes and happiness index and lots of indexes. So obviously we're doing something right there, and it seems to be working, kind of.
Yeah.
Right? So
So one thing that really seems to work here is the unconditional child allowance. It's a relatively small program, but everybody who has a child in Sweden gets a certain amount of money in their bank account every month. It's somewhere on the order of like a couple of $100, depending on how many kids you have. It's not a ton of money. It's not enough to live on, but it goes to everyone, and it gets money into the hands of the people who need it. It's very cheap and easy to administer because there's no like conditionality built into it. Like everybody with a kid gets it. It goes to the rich as well as the poor and so on. You get lots of legitimacy and public backing. But every so often somebody says, well, this is absurd. How come the richest families get as much as the poorest families do? But there are so many advantages with an unconditional cash transfer like this that the benefits widely overpower the
we could probably spend the whole show just talking about this. This is super interesting, and the whole conditionality of how you put things into place. And of course, there will always be people who abuse every kind of program you put in place. No matter where you draw the line, there will always be people on both sides, kind of thing. But I mean, I'm forcing myself to skip into another chapter where you know how to save the climate.
Right. Yeah, no, so massive problem, right? Seemingly untractable. And obviously, there's no one solution that's going to fix it overnight. But what's interesting about the economics profession is there is an idea that's been floating around that garners almost unanimous support. So there's a proposal that economists have signed, and you have hundreds, thousands of people signing this. Economists from left and right, very prominent, famous people, Nobel laureates and whatever. And it's effectively to tax the polluters, the oil companies and so on, and then transfer the money to the people who live in the country. Economists refer to this as a Pigouvian tax. It's something you will have read about if you've taken like microeconomics 101. But it's so simple, and it has, I think, a relatively good shot at working. Now, why don't we already do this? Well, there are multiple things going on. So I have colleagues who work on climate change who've never heard of this proposal, right? Word has not gotten out. People who've heard of it might not understand the logic. It just might sound too simple or whatever. But here we have an idea that's actionable. I think plausibly it could be adopted by the countries that are the worst polluters and so on. And, you know, at the minimum, we should contemplate it. It won't replace all the other things we could do for the climate, but it's something we can do on top. And there's a good chance that it'll work.
And let's see, what are they called? What's it called in English? Utsläppsrätter. Is that the same kind of thing here we're talking about here? Or?
We're not talking about tradable permits.
No, okay.
So this is just like a tax.
This is just a tax
based on like how much carbon dioxide you put into the climate.
But that sounds quite expensive for the big polluters.
It's going to cost, right? It's going to give the non-polluters a huge advantage, right? It's going to give an incentive to the polluters to be better, to try to deliver the goods with lower emissions, because right now the problem is that so many of these corporations don't pay anything at all.
No,
they can pollute quite freely. And it's classic microeconomics 101, right? When you have negative externalities, people produce too much. And so what the tax does is that it incentivizes innovation. It incentivizes the shift from more to less polluting industries, and it's going to punish the people who don't. And then it's going to put money in the pocket of people like you and me. And if we use it wisely on goods that aren't so bad for the environment, we're going to end up being winners here. And so there's a real, win-win, Pareto improvement, as we talk about it in the cards here.
Yeah, and on that, when it does, when the like the polluters, the big polluters, when they have an opportunity to run free, and there's no cap, there's no tax, there's nothing, and they see that, hey, I can just do more of this and I'll just get more back, and there's never any sort of limit to it. We've seen a number of examples of how that can go completely haywire.
Oh yeah, I mean there are hundreds of examples of that. There are also some examples of sort of taxation schemes that seem to work quite well. So alcohol taxation, for example, has this general flavor. So the thought is that consuming alcohol is bad for you and it's bad for people around you. And so we put a tax on it. It brings consumption down. People who still need to consume can do it. They're going to pay a little extra. And then the money gets transferred into programs, ideally, for people who suffer the negative consequences. Right? So the basic idea is familiar, although not quite in those terms.
Yeah. I get that. Now I'm still on the subject, but I'm maybe straying away a bit here. But one very common debate in the papers, again, we're talking about media here, is, the car tax and road tax. And people are saying, oh, I pay so much in car tax, but does it actually go to fix the roads? What happens to the car tax kind of thing?
So that's a political problem, right? Tying the tax monies to things that people care about, either in terms of infrastructure or in terms of money in the pocket. So it's a political problem of designing it right, so framing it right. But of course, there's money to go around, right?
Yeah.
If you tax the polluters. And as a matter of fact, people who drive cars and medium-sized cities like Stockholm don't pay enough, right? They're imposing all sorts of harms on the rest of us, and they can do it for free.
But that's interesting now, because we're now making a decision, because we have philosophical questions, and we have hard economy, and then we have political as well.
Right.
But can the two former influence the latter? I mean, how can we use what you've written about to influence the politics?
So part of why I'm here is that I want to bring up this, I want to have this conversation, right? There's this wonderful science. There's a ton of interesting research going on. There are fantastic philosophers, any university basically has a philosophy department, right? Where these ideas are floating around. Like the challenge is like picking up on these ideas, not necessarily doing anything from scratch, but just picking up on the ideas that are already out there and then transforming them into like actionable, defensible advice that people are proud to implement, right? That's a hard problem. And I don't know that I have the competence to sort of explore the political ins and outs, but I'm here to talk about them.
Yeah.
And I hope many of my colleagues will join me.
And do you think that, this is going to be a leading question here now, but should politicians listen more to philosophers and economists, or speak to them at least?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the opposite is true too. So I think philosophers and economists should listen more to the decision makers to hear like what their perspective is and what they need, because what we're delivering is very often not what the decision maker needs. If you spent more time talking to each other, if there were more fora where we met, they could tell us, well, here's what I need, X, Y, and Z, and we can think about like, can we deliver that, in what way and in what format, and so on.
But on a high level of abstraction, if we're talking about politics,
right,
and the kind of questions that we discussed earlier, and the image I have of a politician thinking that, well, I would want to do this, which is a long-term implementation of something which will make good things happen over 10, 20 years. But hey, I need to stay in office. I need my votes in. And people don't get 20 years. They only get 2 years. Sometimes I feel like they underestimate the voters a lot.
Sure. I think there's a space for both of these conversations, right? As Oscar Wilde put it, right? We have to keep an eye on the stars, right? Even if we live in the gutter, there's something to be said for the broad themes and the big ideas and so on. Then there's also space for a conversation about what's realistically attainable. Like what can we possibly get given the constraints that exist and whatever. And I think we need to be open to having these conversations at the same time.
Yeah. But constraints are important, though. I mean, I work with innovation and creativity, and surprisingly, creativity thrives with constraints. And when there's just a white piece of paper, and you go, be creative, and it's like, that's when it stops. With constraints, you can often find new ways of doing things.
Yeah, and I think there's a parallel for that in the policy space, not the least when it comes to people getting along. So maybe you're politically on the right, I'm politically on the left. We're never going to sit around and iron out our differences and come to agreement about all the big questions. But nonetheless, we might be able to agree on a more concrete level. We might be able to say that, yeah, an unconditional cash transfer is a good idea. You might have one argument for it. I might have another argument for it. But in the presence of these constraints, we might nonetheless be able to make progress.
But if you were going to pick some of the, I know we had lots of wonderful headlines in the book here. We have, I love How to Be Humble. I like that one. What goes into How to Be Humble when it comes to economy?
So I loved writing that chapter because one, economists are not exactly famous for their humility and modesty, right? And I'm struggling with, calibrating my overconfidence as well. But the fact is that there is something like 50 years of research on overconfidence and epistemic humility, as I say, humility that has to do with our belief systems and so on. And what the research shows is that overconfidence is pervasive. Almost everybody has it at least some part of the time. It's resilient. It's very hard to get rid of. Just telling people about overconfidence and so on makes absolutely no difference and whatever. And it's dangerous. So overconfidence has been called the mother of all biases because it has been implicated in all sorts of disasters, financial crashes, engineering disasters, and so on. And yet, the literature isn't entirely negative. It does suggest a couple of things that you can do to calibrate your confidence, to be a little less overconfident. One is to get like decent data, right? And to check your predictions against the evidence. Because if you never check if what you said yesterday turned out to be true today, you can persist in your misconception that you're always right, right? Many people working in organizations will be familiar with this. You dig up the data, you confirm like what you said yesterday. Meteorologists are wonderful at this, whatever. So that's one thing. The other thing is to consider reasons that you may be wrong. And this is kind of counterintuitive. It doesn't come naturally to us, right? In a conversational context or at work, if you say something, people might challenge you for reasons that back that up, right? Somebody might say, Donnie, what makes you think that? What basis do you have for saying that? And so you might in your head rehearse all the reasons suggesting that you're right. But when we're constantly rehearsing and reiterating the reasons why we're right, we end up through various psychological mechanisms overestimating the probability that we're right. It seems as though all the evidence suggests I'm right, right? And so just by asking somebody or asking yourself to consider reasons you may be wrong, you're encouraging yourself to think of the scenarios where what you said turns out not to be true. And the more you think about that, the more you realize that no, there really are like a number of ways in which I might be messing up here. So this is important on an individual level. It's like you can talk to yourself when you're making big decisions, right? Not just what are the reasons to think I should make this investment, but also what are the scenarios where this is going to be a massive failure. And in an organizational context, you can try to establish a culture where you talk about the reasons you might be wrong. So if somebody's making a presentation, you can challenge them to explain like under what conditions the proposal is going to fail. We need to build a culture where it's fine to admit that you were wrong, right? A culture where we encourage people to confess that they made a mistake and to explore the reasons why and figure out how we can avoid it the next time. You can demonstrate this in your own conversation by saying things like, I might be wrong. I'm not sure. What do you think? And so on. The background is that very often we do the opposite of this. We select for confidence, right? You're hiring, you're looking at all these people. Maybe there's a guy who's like supremely confident and you say, he seems like he knows something. But if you're selecting for confidence, not competence, given that these things don't come together, right? You end up selecting for overconfidence. And then you might be ridiculing people who make mistakes. You see this on social media a lot, right? If somebody makes a mistake, or if somebody admits they made a mistake, you instantly get a pile on of people saying, what a jerk you are, you should have known and whatever. And that's the completely opposite thing that we want to do, right? We want to say, thank you for acknowledging this. Let's figure out how we can avoid that kind of mistake in the future. So the punchline here is that there's 50 years of half a century of empirical research on this. It leads to like very simple, actionable advice that we can implement today. I'll start. What I'm saying might be wrong, right? Empirical research is always provisional. It might turn out to need modification, but where we are right now, this is pretty solid evidence.
I just have to say that this section here was something that every single entrepreneur and entrepreneurship center and everybody needs to talk about, because we've been, as you said, and I love what you said with we reward confidence, not necessarily competence,
Right.
right? That's
Right.
been the rewarding mechanism, which means that I need to be confident and act as if I know what I'm talking about, and that way I'll get rewarded. And as you said, and then we ridicule everything else.
Right.
And the whole, it's my backyard, the whole sort of entrepreneurship thing is believe in your vision, push through, don't listen to the naysayers, that kind of thing. Go. Which, of course, you need some kind of confidence as well, but
within bounds.
But you need to
important.
back it up with, make decisions on data and ask yourself, not in a, I'm never going to make this, not that way, but actually ask yourself. I mean, my favorite question to entrepreneurs is, how will this fail?
It's an absolutely critical question, right?
And then they go, what do you mean? But how will this fail? In which ways can this fail?
Right. And you need to ask that question. You might need somebody on your team to raise that question every so often. And there's a gender component to this too, right? If it's true in your team that the men tend to be more confident, they might crowd out the insights of the rest of the team, the women on the team. And so you might end up with a team that's unbalanced, not non-diverse, and ridiculously overconfident.
But I think that is
come back and hurt you.
Yeah, and I think that is also, and again, I know that maybe I'm reading a lot into this now, but I think when we talk about the Nordics and the Nordic leadership and the flat organizations, I think that also that comes into it as well, where we don't have the alpha male thing going on where you have to sort of prove yourself by killing everything else. But there is a discussion on the floor in a less hierarchical manner as well. I know we're off topic here now, but this is super, super interesting.
But I think there might be something to that. And there might be something about labor law as well. So I know that some entrepreneurs will say that if you can be fired on the spot, you might hesitate to disagree with the person at the top, right? If you cannot be fired on the spot, you might feel a little more confident in registering a different opinion.
Of course. I mean, the more you have to lose, the less risk you'll take.
Right.
So so many good things there. I'm looking at the timer. It's 5 minutes to 3. We have 4 minutes to go here, almost 3 minutes to go. It's the world's fastest half an hour coffee break with me, Donny. And this has been so interesting.
I'm so happy to be here. We just said we have 6 chapters left, just so you know.
I know. We'll come back and we'll do chapter by chapter all the way, all the spring here. No, but if you want to leave us with something, then what would you want to say to the audience here when it comes to what you've written about and how people who are listening to you, and many entrepreneurs and founders, small business owners here that are listening to what you're saying here now, and how can they take what you've written and into their sort of world?
Well, on the more abstract level, I mean, science is amazing. It offers all sorts of tools that we can use in business, as entrepreneurs, in nonprofits, in politics, and so on. But at a more concrete level, I think the chapter on overconfidence sort of illustrates the point so well. Like, confront your ideas with data. Go out and check. Were you right yesterday when things happened today? And finally, think of reasons you may be wrong. There's always some scenario in which you fail, right? You want to give a little attention to that.
Wonderful. I actually read a research report that they did a check with people with stocks, investments, and it showed that when times were good, they checked their investments like 5 or 6 times per day, and when times were bad, they didn't check it more than like once a week.
It's an ostrich effect.
The ostrich effect, exactly. And as in fear of seeing that it's going down the drain, I don't want to see it happening. Where in reality, we should be doing the opposite and actually look at what's going wrong and trying to fix it.
I'm sure people do the same thing in relationship and in warfare and so on, although I'm glad
wonderful.
I was running out.
Thank you so much for coming. As I said, we could do probably one show per chapter here. But again, I will actually just show the picture here again. Totally worth reading. How Economics Can Save the World with our guest of today, Erik Angner. Wonderful. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Donny.
Thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you next week, 2:30 p.m. Innovation Fika. You know where to find it, live on LinkedIn and YouTube. And bye for now, everyone. Have a great day.